Hello, and welcome to the Truthwards podcast, where we discuss the details of natural solutions for chronic health conditions. I'm Natalie Kasana, and I'm so happy and grateful that you are listening. I hope you will enjoy it or get something useful out of this series. In this episode, you'll learn about my husband's experience using natural solutions to resolve his chronic lower back pain. Specifically, I'll share all the details of the type of pain he experienced, what worked and what didn't work, and how it continues to play out today, so that you could try exactly what he did yourself if you wanted to. I'd like to start by noting that the views and opinions shared during this podcast are my own and do not reflect the views of my employer or any affiliated organizations. That equally applies to any guests that may appear on the podcast as well. Additionally, because we will be talking about health topics, I want to make clear that I am not a licensed healthcare professional, and any advice shared on this podcast is not meant to be a substitute for professional medical advice, nor a guarantee that the same results would be seen by anyone else. I would always encourage anyone to seek the opinion of a healthcare provider before trying any possible healing paths. It is important to establish a clinical diagnosis and assess possible risks or interference with current medications. My husband suffered from severe chronic lower back pain for about a year and a half. He experienced a very painful, tight, achy feeling in the lower half of his back, close to his spine, on either side of his spine. And sometimes when it got worse, the pain would radiate into his groin area and his hips. He also experienced very similar pain in his upper back and neck area at different times as well. This pain made it very difficult to do physical activities and even difficult to sit for long periods of time at work. The main type of solution that ended up working for him was actually psychological. It could be characterized as a mental health shift. It involved a conscious change in belief about the cause of his back pain, and also involved addressing suppressed emotions. Remarkably, he experienced 100% recovery. Similar to my eczema, it initially completely faded away, and then over time, it came back a little bit here and there. But for the large majority of time, he is now completely back pain-free. I always like to go a little bit into people's childhood or experiences they had when they were younger, as they may have an impact on experiences or health conditions that they have when they're older. So as I did for myself and my son, I'll share a little bit about my husband's childhood and just his general experience growing up. He was born and raised in New Delhi, India, and he came to New York when he was about 22 years old, and he has remained here ever since. Since high school, he has worked out regularly, often going to the gym and also playing all different kinds of sports. He has had several sports-related joint surgeries for his knees and his shoulders, but he has never had any type of surgery for his back. So how did it all start? For him, it started when he was at the gym, and he experienced a pain in his upper back neck area after doing a particular exercise. Then after a time, he had a similar pain in his lower back, and that pain also he thought was triggered from an exercise he was doing at the gym. He thought it was from lifting weights or doing a particular move that might have triggered this pain, so he was more careful at the gym. However, this pain did not fade away the way a typical muscle pain fades after a period of time. It progressively got worse instead of getting better. He had regular daily pain in his lower back, in the lumbar area, and he experienced his pain while moving, while doing physical activities, but also just while sitting still. It became very difficult for him to sit all day long at work since the pain was worse in the sitting position. But then as it got worse, the pain was so bad that he even felt it when he was lying down at night. Sometimes it would wake him up at night. So it got to the point where really no position, sitting, lying, walking, nothing would really relieve the pain. Now, my husband tried many things to try to relieve this back pain. He went to many physical therapists, 3 different physical therapists actually, and followed the routines that those physical therapists recommended, which included particular exercises. And this is over a period of many months that he saw these different physical therapists. He went to acupuncture, so he had several sessions of acupuncture on his back, and he also saw a chiropractor at a few different times. While these things may have provided some temporary relief, nothing actually impacted the intensity of his chronic pain that continued day to day. And it got to the point where he was rubbing arnica. You may have heard of this natural ointment that's supposed to relieve muscle and joint pains. He was rubbing arnica on his back every day, and I was helping actually give him a massage on his lower back because we thought it was muscle related and tightness related, and we were hoping these massages would ease the pain. And this happened daily for months and months. In fact, we started to notice skin discoloration on his lower back from how many times, well, we are assuming it's because of how many times we were actually applying arnica to his back. He also brought a hot water bottle to work, and he would put that against the back of his chair so that he could manage to sit for the whole day, as somehow that heat seemed to ease the pain or at least distract him from the pain enough to sit. And for those of you who might not know, a hot water bottle is essentially a rubber container that you pour hot water into, and then you wrap it with a cloth, so it was like a warm pack against his back. And as I mentioned earlier, he already went to the gym regularly, so he was regularly doing all kinds of strengthening exercises for his back, and he combined that with stretching as well after his workouts. So he was pursuing what we thought were the ways to help back pain, which is strengthening and stretching. And he did continue to work out despite the pain, but it became progressively more difficult. So after about a year and a half of progressively increasing back pain and having tried all of these natural solutions that we think should typically work for back pain, he had experienced no relief, and it was getting worse and worse. And he was starting to feel really hopeless and really frustrated because what else could possibly work for physical back pain? Everything that should have typically worked or that doctors or healthcare professionals had recommended to work was not working. The pain was getting really unbearable and really made it difficult for him to sit at work, as I already mentioned, and to play sports, which he loves doing. So it really impacted his quality of life in a major way. My husband very rarely takes pain medication and tries to avoid it whenever possible. He reached a breaking point with his back pain when we were taking a short, maybe 3-hour flight within the country, and he had to take prescription-level painkillers in order to just sit on the flight for that short duration. It was simply unbearable. So we scheduled an appointment for an MRI and a consultation with a top back surgeon here in New York City. He completed the MRI, and the doctor told him that while they didn't find anything serious, it was likely a herniated disc. They recommended further physical therapy, but he had already tried that many times, and he told the doctor. So the doctor recommended cortisone injections. Not knowing any other option at this point, he reluctantly scheduled his first appointment for those. However, we had previously read that in studies on the effectiveness of pain medicine or pain solutions for chronic lower back pain, the placebo treatment was actually as effective as the actual treatment in several of these studies. So we were not very optimistic about the success of a pain reduction treatment like cortisone injections. Not to mention, we were hesitant about the side effects of those cortisone injections, as they are essentially a steroid medication, which is meant to suppress the symptoms or reduce inflammation as opposed to actually addressing the root cause of the issue. At that time, out of desperation for a natural solution that would actually address the underlying root cause, as well as wanting to avoid the negative side effects of cortisone injections, he was searching online for any other possible solution that might have worked for anyone out there for chronic lower back pain. He stumbled upon a book called Healing Back Pain: The Mind-Body Connection by Dr. John E. Sarno. While the premise of the book sounded a little far-fetched, he was at a point of total desperation for relief and for an answer that would actually work. The book had good reviews, and not really having any other options, he decided he had nothing to lose, and he ordered the book. Dr. Sarno was a doctor who specialized in physical medicine and rehabilitation. He saw many patients who suffered from back pain, and over time, he became increasingly frustrated with what felt like his inability to actually help many of these patients. And I want to spend a little time deep diving on some of his thoughts around it, what he observed, and how he ended up coming up with his theories and recommendations, which is what he then wrote in his book that my husband read. Because I think it helps to understand a little bit more about the background to understand the theory and recommendations as well. So he observed that many of his patients had diagnoses and pathology that didn't really match their own described location and symptoms of their pain. Like maybe the pathology would show that they had a specific issue with one specific herniated disc, but they would describe pain in multiple different areas of their back that often seemed completely unrelated with that specific diagnosis or that specific location of the herniated disc. He also started to notice in his observation, the more confident they were in him as a doctor, the better chance they seemed to have of healing from their chronic back pain. So he started to think that their healing was psychosomatic. It was more based on their confidence in him as a doctor than on the actual physical treatments that he was recommending. So he changed his treatment recommendations to focus on what he was observing as a potential psychosomatic syndrome. Now, these recommendations that he tried did not have any basis in what he had been taught in school, and frankly, they went against conventional medicine completely at that time. But despite that, he started to see results. Now, a little bit going into the background of the book and the incidence of chronic back pain and how it has changed in the past few years. In the time period since he issued the first copy of the book in 1991 until it was republished in 2016, back pain incidence has increased exponentially, with over 100 million people suffering from it in the United States. In fact, the 2010 Global Burden of Disease study ranked chronic back pain as the single highest cause of disability out of 291 chronic conditions, and estimated that the cost of this burden exceeds $100 billion annually, with 2/3 of that cost being in lost work hours due to the pain of that disability. So, needless to say, this is a huge issue. And there's another factor that I want to talk about. The pharmaceutical industry responded to this increase of chronic back pain by introducing new opioid medicines and overall quadrupling the sale of synthetic opioids. There is no doubt that this has contributed to the rise of the current opioid epidemic in the United States, which has been classified as a public health emergency since 2017 and continues to be so. In fact, numerous states have actually received settlements from pharma companies and distributors for the overproduction and overprescription of opioid medicines. And now, opioid overdose, sadly, is the leading cause of accidental death in the United States, with over 200 Americans dying every day from opioid overdose. Now, I mention all of this to emphasize the importance of addressing the root cause and finding solutions for chronic back pain because of the huge impact on other areas like this opioid epidemic. How are we going to resolve this opioid epidemic if we aren't addressing the root cause of people's chronic pain for which they turn to these medicines, especially when, in my husband's experience, he couldn't find relief from the other conventionally known ways to treat back pain, like physical therapy, strengthening, stretching, acupuncture. All of these things were not working. So again, I say all of this to emphasize the importance of this topic and finding a resolution that actually works. And Dr. Sarno was already talking about this in his book in 1991. But the things he's recommended have not been pushed to mainstream conventional medicine yet. And that's why it's very important that I share these firsthand experiences and results that my husband saw in hopes that it could help someone else. And also, eventually, hopefully, we can collect enough data over time to start to push towards a more data-driven solution for chronic back pain that's actually effective. Now, in 1992, the scientific and medical community did acknowledge the impact of emotions on physical health when they established the NIH Office of Complementary and Alternative Medicine, which moved the arena of mind-body medicine closer to mainstream. But the problem is, physical doctors such as internists, orthopedists, rheumatologists, and dermatologists are still the ones that must make the diagnosis and recommend the treatment. And they are not trained on the mind-body connection. Only psychologists and psychiatrists are trained on that. And physical doctors are still trained to explain all physical problems with physiological reasons. They are not trained to think about the possible cause being psychosomatic or being psychological. Thus, the problem is not solved because people must still go to those physical doctors to figure out the next step in their treatment journey. And if those doctors don't recommend or even consider that they address potential underlying mental causes, they aren't referred to the right people who can help them, or they don't even consider that as an option. So there's still a break in the medical journey to help people recognize the potential impact of mind-body effects. And I want to share a quote from Dr. Sarno's book that I think sums up what he describes as the main remaining problem. He says, the patient is viewed as a machine controlled by several systems, omitting the person's psychology entirely as one of those systems. This omission in the physician's portfolio has been a leading factor in the epidemiological increase in pain disorders. But Dr. Sarno also wisely notes that there has been another shift since 1991 when his book was first published. And that shift is exactly what Truthwards is all about. People are engaging more in their own healthcare due to unprecedented access to healthcare information on the internet. And this has started to result in a shift of authority from the physician to the patient. And given that this type of back pain that we're talking about is actually, according to his theory and my husband's experience, triggered by emotions, the cure is simply knowledge and information, combined with the need to implement it, for which you could reach out to specialists in that area, of course. But this condition is actually a perfect fit for this new way of thinking, because patients don't have to go to the doctor to get this treatment. They can read it themselves, they can implement it themselves, they can take control of their health. And if this mind-body connection that Dr. Sarno talks about is taken seriously, he believes it could cause a really big shift in the tide of chronic pain disorders. Okay, now getting into the actual details of the solution that he recommends. First of all, he noticed that highly successful, motivated people who had lots of goals for themselves, were high achievers, and were aware of their own weaknesses and shortcomings, these people were more likely to experience this syndrome. And I might sum this up as people who have some sort of tension between what they want to be and what they are, or where they are in their life. These people tend to be prone to this issue. And a huge factor here that Dr. Sarno brings up in his book again and again is that these types of people or these types of situations cause people to feel resentment and anger at their inability to be where they want to be in their life, or do what they want to do, or achieve what they want to achieve. And he theorizes that suppression of this type of resentment and anger, which is actually usually subconscious, is the root cause of this issue. Another way I could sum it up or describe it is if there's a dichotomy or a difference between where you want to be or what you want to be doing and what you should actually be doing or what you are doing, you feel some sort of internal resistance, anger, resentment. And if that's kind of suppressed because you feel like you just need to accept the way it is, that can cause this kind of suppressed, repressed, negative emotions. And Dr. Sarno's theory is that these repressed negative emotions are the root cause of this kind of chronic lower back pain, or really chronic back pain of any location. But the key here is that these feelings are often suppressed. You're not even aware you're doing this. This is subconscious. And he noticed that patients that described their pain kind of moving around in different areas on the back, like maybe one time is on this side worse and the next day the other side's worse, the types of treatments that he was recommending seemed to be more effective for these types of patients. So this is a physical indicator of a sign that the root cause may actually be mental. When the pain is moving around to different spots and not necessarily always focus on the same spot. And that's exactly what my husband experienced as well. Sometimes one side would be worse on his back and other times another side would be worse. And frankly, that doesn't make any sense, right? If you have a very specific injury, the pain should always be where that injury is. Why would it shift around to different parts of your back? Also, as he notes, it's the body's nature to heal fairly quickly from any injury. So why would the pain of an injury continue to last at the same level of intensity for years, potentially, without healing? That doesn't really make any sense if it's caused by a physical injury. And obviously, in my husband's case, when you do multiple physical things to try to fix that injury, but it does nothing to it, that's another sign that there's some problem here where the physical interventions are not making any difference at all. Okay, what did Dr. Sarno recommend as the actual solution? He suggested to regularly repeat to yourself, there is nothing wrong with my back. My back is perfectly healthy and physically very strong, and therefore there's nothing to fear about the back pain. And also to repeat that the cause of the back pain is my suppressed emotions, particularly anger and resentment, and to state out loud the cause of those feelings, which of course you have to work through yourself to try to understand, and that can help you to release them and therefore the back pain to fade away. But I want to note, it's not just about getting rid of those suppressed emotions. Even becoming aware of the existence of them can actually help the back pain to go away. You don't necessarily need to fully let them go. Just becoming aware of this potential cause that the suppressed emotions could be causing your back pain, that knowledge in and of itself seems to be effective in actually helping the back pain to fade away. And he also recommends that you should just continue with all of your physical activities. Do not baby your back. Do not be careful. Do not limit activity. Just go ahead, believing that your back is fully healthy and there's no issues with it. And that actually helps to convince your body there's nothing wrong with it and helps the pain to fade away. I know it's a little weird sounding, but I have to explain how it really, really worked for my husband. So I'm sharing all of the details that Dr. Sarno recommended so that you could actually implement these exact techniques yourself at home if you want. And he recommends to shift your attention from the pain in your back to your emotional pain or your suppressed emotions. And believe that you are in control, not your subconscious mind. Think psychological, not physical. So I'm summarizing his recommendations into 4 key things. 1, repeat regularly that your back is perfectly healthy and strong and have no fear about it. 2, repeat that the main cause of your pain is actually suppressed emotions and state them out loud and try to work through them. 3, resume all physical activities, believing that there is nothing actually physically wrong with your back. And 4 is kind of a summary. Think psychological, not physical, and believe in your ability to be in control and not let the subconscious, repressed emotions control your life any longer. Now, how did my husband go about effectively implementing these suggestions in his life? I'll share the details. He read the book and he started trying to be aware of his own suppressed emotions, things he might be angry about or resentful about. He stopped all massage, all hot water bottles. He moved around as if there was nothing wrong with his back. He went to the gym. He did all exercises. He played all sports. He completely stopped any measures to protect or be careful with his back. In fact, he intentionally did exercises that are really difficult for your back, like deadlifts. He just went to the gym and just did them right away after reading the book with no other changes between reading the book and doing them. Now, you might be wondering, how did he have the confidence to believe that his back was fine and just believe that this method was true? My husband is a very, very logical, fact-driven person. He doesn't want to just believe in anything. So if you're like that, I want to share what worked for him, what convinced him to give this method a try and to just believe and have faith that it would work. So one, he did notice that his pain symptoms moved around from spot to spot. And logically, that doesn't make any sense. If you have a herniated disc, it should be right where the herniated disc is, and maybe the muscle's right next to it. But his pain would be on one side and then be on the other side, and then he would experience almost the same thing on his upper back at different times. So he was convinced that it didn't make sense that a pain would shift around locations. Second of all, as I said earlier, all the physical methods he had tried, which have worked for other physical injuries in the past, did not work. So going to the gym, stretching, strengthening, acupuncture, massage, all of these things were ineffective. So this also helped convince him that maybe it's not a physical cause. As far-fetched as that might seem, maybe there is something to this. And third, as I mentioned before, we had read these studies that there have been actual clinical trials showing that the placebo was equally effective as the treatment drug when it came to pain-reducing medicines for back pain, which indicates there is some effect at play, some potentially psychosomatic or mental emotional effect where if you believe you're taking something like a placebo, it actually has an impact on the pain. That doesn't make any sense from a physical perspective. So all these reasons helped convince him to give it a chance, right? Because you have to kind of believe to make this work. You have to have a little faith. But it was worth it given that all the things that should have worked for a physical injury just did not work. And of course, he was desperate for a solution at this point. Desperation is also a factor that will help you try things you might not originally think have any merit. Now, how soon did he see any impact on his lower back pain? Within just a couple days after reading the book and starting to apply the techniques, he started to notice a reduction in his back pain. And even that small reduction was enough for him to be like, okay, maybe something's happening here. That just increased his faith in trying this new method, that maybe there's something to it. How long did it take from when he first read the book and immediately started implementing the techniques to complete elimination of his back pain? Just 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks was enough time for him to apply these techniques and for his back pain that had lasted for a year and a half and was severely debilitating and really impacting his quality of life. Just 2 weeks and his back pain completely faded away. Now, how did that feel? I mean, I was there with him and we were like, what black magic is this? Like, seriously, what have we stumbled upon? Why don't people know about this? This is insane. A year and a half of suffering, and in 2 weeks, the pain completely faded away. I mean, we were obviously so incredibly relieved. He was so happy to be able to go back to the gym and resume the sports that he loved and not be suffering from this horrible back pain. And oh my God, we were so relieved and grateful that we didn't end up going through with the cortisone shots, let alone surgery. Like, we went to see a surgeon. Imagine if they'd recommended surgery and he had gone through with that. Huh. We are just so glad that he discovered this when he did. And Dr. Sarno even mentions in the book, he mentions that he's seen patients where they actually had a back surgery and it was ineffective. And then they came to him and applied these methods to address their mental health and their back pain faded away. I mean, we are so glad that we didn't end up in that situation having an unnecessary and ineffective surgery. So essentially this means, even though his MRI showed that there could be a herniated disc, he had no physical issues at all. In 2 weeks, only applying these mental changes, his back pain completely faded away. He didn't really face any challenges in implementing the solution that Dr. Sarno recommended. He found it very straightforward and easy to follow the recommendations in the book, which is basically summarized into those 4 points that I shared earlier. If anything, maybe he found it a little difficult to uncover the root cause of his suppressed emotions. Like, why was he suppressing these negative emotions, the resentment, anger, whatever else it could be? Uncovering what those are and trying to bring them into the light, that can be a little difficult. But as I mentioned with my experience with eczema in the first episode, just thinking about what's bothering me. Ask yourself, what is bothering you? Or it might help to see a therapist, talk to someone else, talk to a friend, talk to a family member, talk through some of these issues, but you can just do it yourself. Speaking from experience, from myself and from his own experience of how to basically become aware of these suppressed emotions, one technique that has worked for both of us is writing things out and asking oneself, what is bothering me? What is causing me to feel upset? That things I might not be thinking about on a daily basis. And also, it was perhaps a little difficult to believe in the beginning that there's absolutely nothing wrong with my back, and to be brave enough and not be fearful to stop all precautions and continue all physical activities. That can be a little daunting as well. So just wanted to share those challenges in case you try this yourself. He also did experience that those things can be a little difficult, but certainly not an impediment to him actually being able to implement the solution and experience amazing results in just 2 weeks. I also want to share that, although the pain completely faded away after those 2 weeks, there have been subsequent times when my husband has gone through, let's say, a stressful life situation that may have triggered some repressed emotions, and that back pain has come back a little bit. Similarly to how I described my eczema, it comes back a little bit now and then due to stressful situations, but in each of these instances, he repeats the recommendations of Dr. Sarno, working through the emotional issues, and the back pain immediately fades away again within a few days or weeks. Sometimes, to be honest, it can be difficult to work through these stressors in life, so that may cause the time period to be a little longer for the pain to fade away, but it is directly associated with dealing with the stress in his life. He's also noticed, interestingly, that sometimes if he gets sick, like with a cold or flu, he might experience a little twinge of that same back pain, and again, that fades away as soon as he heals from that illness. Since all conventional treatments talk about side effects, and often those side effects are negative, I want to emphasize that there are no negative side effects of this treatment. If anything, there are only positive side effects of dealing with your suppressed anger and resentment and other negative emotions that you might be harboring subconsciously. So really only positive side effects of applying these types of psychological techniques. Now, my husband and I have known many people who have suffered from a similar type of chronic back pain. And every time we are so excited to share, oh, get this book, read this will help you. And I want to share that people generally, they might be enthusiastic and excited and happy for my husband that this book helped him. But we've experienced that people are very reluctant to believe this could be effective. They want to trust their doctors. They want to trust their MRI showing that there is an actual physical injury. And people seem to be very reluctant to actually buy the book, read it, and try these techniques. And to me, that seems really unfortunate because there's no hurt in trying this technique before you pursue a more serious physical intervention like cortisone shots or surgery. Physical therapy, absolutely. I mean, try it. If it works, great. That means maybe it was a physical injury. But if physical therapy and other physical interventions are simply not working and your pain is repeating and recurring, we always felt very frustrated because we wanted to help our friends who were suffering from these things. And we thought we'd found something that was so amazing, but people seemed to be a bit resistant or hesitant to read the book and try these techniques. And just wanted to share that as that's generally been people's reactions to not only this back pain relief, but also I experienced that when sharing the story of eczema relief, both for myself and for my baby. And this really emphasizes the need to gather data and have clearly data-driven results so that people are more likely to understand when one of these natural treatment techniques may be applicative to them, and also be more likely to believe it or give it a try if they understand how effective it really could be. People are hesitant to just believe other people's stories. They trust their doctors, they trust the conventional medical system, which is based on studies, and these natural solutions have not been studied. So again, I repeat myself a lot on this, but that is my main driver in wanting to collect all these success stories that give hope that there is some other answer out there, even if it hasn't been studied yet. If we gather enough of these stories, it can help drive the motivation to study these solutions further. And eventually, they could be more readily available or recommended by healthcare professionals so that people are more likely to give them a try. And hopefully, find relief if they haven't been able to find it from other conventional solutions, like my husband. And honestly, I don't really blame people in not believing the mental connection with back pain. I mean, my husband and I found it extremely hard to believe. Like, for weeks and weeks after he recovered from his back pain, we would look at each other and be like, what was that? How does that work? How is that even real? Like, it's really hard to believe unless you experience it. We kept saying to ourselves, if someone else told us a story, we also be like, okay, yeah, like, happy for you, good for you, but like, not very believable. So I get it. I get the doubt. I get the hesitation. It's not something that we are taught or even that physicians are taught a lot about, this mind-body connection and how impactful it actually could be. So now I want to share a few of the important lessons or takeaways that we got from this experience. First of all, this book was published decades ago based on hundreds of patients' experiences. Yet no doctor or physical therapist or any other healthcare practitioner that my husband saw mentioned any type of mind-body connection or even the possibility of it when he saw them and presented with back pain. So the way the current healthcare system is set up, if someone follows the typical path for back pain treatment, they will never get to this simple answer unless they get completely fed up with things not working and they go out and search for the answer themselves and happen to come across the book the way my husband did. And the sad thing is, none of those other things actually worked because they were trying to address a physical problem that didn't exist. There was no physical problem. So this means anyone else suffering from a similar condition as my husband is going to struggle to get to the answer the same way he did. Even up to and including surgery would not have fixed the issue because there was no physical cause to the pain. So many people these days live super stressful lives, set really high expectations for themselves, and I'm sure are suppressing all kinds of emotions. So there is no way my husband is the only one suffering from this condition. I mean, every time you think you're the only person out there dealing with a certain situation, think again. There's always someone out there who has experienced the same thing or has thought of the same good idea you've thought of. Like, there's a lot of people in this world, right? So many people must be suffering from the same condition my husband is. But no one in the medical care system is really addressing this. And that's really unfortunate because it's such a simple, easy thing to try. There is no harm in trying this. If physical therapy and other physical methods haven't worked, if strengthening, stretching, these other types of things have done nothing to improve your pain over a long period of time, what's the harm in trying this? What's the harm in trying to assess if you have suppressed emotions and work through them? If anything, that's a good thing, right? So this should be one of the first things that doctors recommend. Give it a try. See if it works. If it does, great. Then many physical interventions, up to and including surgery, could potentially be avoided for many people. That is so much unnecessary pain and cost that could be avoided. And I'm not even getting into the theories that Dr. Sarno presents as to how he thinks the suppressed emotions cause or contribute to the back pain. I think they're still theories, and I think they're not the most important thing to address right now. And I first want to gather evidence as to which solutions seem to have the most merit for the most number of people, and that can maybe contribute to the incentive to do further research down the road as to why these things might be working. It seems that for many people, more than one solution could be needed to experience complete remission. That was the case for me with my eczema, where a lot of it had to do with my mental stress patterns. But then when I tried the same diet that worked to relieve my baby's eczema, it actually helped me to get rid of the last maybe 10% of my eczema. So what's interesting is my husband tried that same diet that we had done for the eczema, and it did not relieve the remaining occasional flare-up of his back pain. So we are still looking for that final additional something that could help to completely make it so that this back pain never comes back, even in stressful situations. And if we figure it out, we'll be sure to report back. I've said this earlier in the podcast, but the most useful resource for my husband in actually solving his chronic back pain ended up being the book called Healing Back Pain: The Mind-Body Connection by Dr. John E. Sarno. Now I want to share a few tips or tricks or things to be aware of if someone was trying to follow the same solution path that my husband tried and that worked for him in the end. So the first thing I want to talk about is, over the years since his back pain disappeared, he has experienced similar aches and pains in other parts of his body, like his shoulder, his elbow, his knees, and even once his heel. And these were similar types of pains in that there actually was no real physical injury. And when he decided to try applying the same techniques that Dr. Sarno had recommended for back pain to those other body parts or body areas, the pain actually faded away. So this is something Dr. Sarno also had mentioned in the book, and I want to make you aware of that in case that happens to you as well, that there's a chance that if you try the same techniques for other body parts, they could be effective as well. That is something my husband did observe and has experienced. And in all of these cases, the pain was real, but there was no physical trigger. There was no physical injury to that area. Just by working on his repressed emotions again and basically applying the same techniques that Dr. Sarno recommended for back pain, he was able to relieve the aches and pains in those other areas as well. Bottom line is, don't be concerned if you get a similar pain in a different joint, and consider that it might not be physical. It could actually be mental or emotionally triggered. Like one time, my husband got this pain in his heel, and for a while he's like, what did I do? I must have injured my heel. And he walked around with it for like a couple weeks, and then he was like, I didn't injure my heel. This is ridiculous. And he literally just like took his heel and whacked it on the floor a few times, and the pain disappeared. He literally decided it's not real, and I'm just going to do the opposite of protect it and bang it against the floor, and the pain just disappeared. He had been walking so carefully on that foot for a few weeks, trying to avoid injuring it further. There was no injury. It is a bizarre phenomenon. It really is. But another thing is, you have to be really honest with yourself about the things that are bothering you, the things that cause stress in your life, emotions you may have repressed for a long time. And it could be really helpful, as I said earlier, to meet with a therapist or to write things out to try to understand what is bothering you. Because that can be really hard if you suppressed it for a long time and you're really not even conscious of it. It can be hard to figure out what are those causes. Another tip that my husband wanted to pass on is that what he did to help implement the solution is he reread certain key pages in the book every night before he went to sleep. And these key pages reiterated the 4 steps that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. And whenever he did that before going to sleep, his back felt better in the morning. So maybe it helps to do it in the evening. That's what he tried, and that's what seemed to work. And lastly, I'm going to repeat this again. It doesn't hurt to give this an earnest try. Worst case scenario, it delays your surgery or your cortisone injections for a few weeks while you try and see if it makes any difference for you. Best case scenario, you can completely avoid the surgery or needing the cortisone injections. So it's worth a try. I think from his experience, I just really wanted to get this story out there and this information out there because he was so desperate for a solution for so long. And it was so simple in the end. It's really a shame that the medical community is not sharing this more frequently as a potential solution for chronic back pain. Now that I've shared his story, I want to talk a little bit about a topic that is really intriguing to me. And that is, frankly, it is mind-boggling that something so physical as severe chronic back pain could have such a strong correlation with a mental or emotional state, that there could be such a strong mental emotional trigger for such a very physical feeling and manifestation of the chronic condition. It goes against everything that we believe as a society or that conventional medicine tells us, so much so that people will usually never even think to consider that there could be a mental trigger for a physical condition, and therefore they'll never even think to address it. But if you watched my first episode, you may be realizing now what is so interesting to me about this is my husband experienced this situation where there was a mental emotional solution to his physical chronic condition, which was severe back pain. And for me as well, there was a mental emotional solution for my eczema chronic condition, which is a very physical, uncomfortable condition as well. So this mental physical connection or mental triggers causing physical symptoms seems to be a very big theme. Okay, big is relative. This is 2 samples here. A sample size of 2 is by no means big or significant in any way, shape, or form. But the fact that my husband and I both experienced situations where we had a significant chronic condition, physical chronic condition, we tried many solutions, nothing worked until we addressed mental or emotional underlying patterns, and that helped us resolve the issue fairly quickly. The fact that that happened to both of us for 2 different conditions, to me means there's something here. There is some important link between mental state and many chronic physical conditions. And conventional medicine is not regularly addressing these, or at least not effectively set up to address these or even to identify them. Usually, physical symptoms are still only treated with physical solutions. But with all the chronic conditions out there, 60% of adults, 40% of children in the US suffering from a chronic condition, I think this is an area where a lot more research needs to be done. It will take a ton of evidence and a huge push to shift the way conventional medicine approaches these chronic conditions. But I believe it could be essential to actually bring people the relief they so desperately need. And given the cost of chronic condition management, let alone the quality of life for people, the cost accounts for 90% of the nation's $4.1 trillion annual healthcare expenses. I mean, I think that's a pretty big priority, don't you? And I'm really optimistic that we could see huge changes if we start to take this seriously, start to address it, do more research, and figure out how to change the way the healthcare system directs people when they present with symptoms of these chronic conditions so that they are at least guided to address the potential of there being a mental emotional trigger or cause of their chronic condition. There's a lot of potential there, I think. I'm excited about it. So now I want to talk just for a few minutes about how this experience continues to play out in my husband's life today. I've already addressed most of these points, but just want to reiterate for clarity. He continues to be completely pain-free in his back about 95% of the time. He is very active, playing multiple sports and working out in the gym several times a week. The back pain only occasionally recurs if he's sick or going through a particularly stressful or challenging experience in life. at which time he just reemploys the techniques that Dr. Sarno recommended, which I shared earlier, and the symptoms fade away pretty quickly. And just as the remaining 5 to 10% of my eczema faded away when I applied the same diet solutions that worked for my baby's eczema, we have yet to find a solution that fully gets rid of the back pain so that even when my husband is sick or stressed, the pain doesn't come back. Diet did not seem to make a difference for that so far in his experience. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about one more interesting topic, and that is I myself have experienced several different kinds of back pain. And even though this episode is about my husband's experience, I want to share my experience because I think it sheds a little light on the question of whether it's a physical issue or an emotional issue, and the fact that both can actually potentially exist and be true. Now, I don't want you to get confused by this, but in my experience, I am quite sure I have actually experienced both kinds of back pain, physically caused and mentally caused. And I want to share a little bit with you the difference between those experiences I've had so that maybe it could help you to understand more or try to figure out which one might apply to you if you are experiencing chronic back pain. So when I was a teenager and young adult, I had a lot of lower back pain, and I did physical therapy a few times, and the pain did not really go away until I started full-fledged strengthening exercises for my back. And at that point, the pain completely faded away. So for me, that initial pain I had disappeared completely after physical therapy and strengthening and stretching. And then it did completely go away. And I believe that pain was actually physically caused by muscle tightness and also muscle weakness. Then, after my husband's experience with back pain that I've shared, I also experienced a new kind of back pain that I hadn't had before. After I finished grad school, which I've shared in the first episode was a very stressful period of my life, right after I graduated and completed the whole thing, suddenly my back got really tight and really painful. And it was so painful that I couldn't even bend down to tie my shoelaces. It felt really stiff. And this came out of the blue. This was not the same kind of pain that I had experienced when I was a young adult and I had weak muscles. This was like an achy, tight feeling that was not on the muscles itself. It was like in the area of the lumbar spine, but it didn't feel like it was an actual muscle pain. It was like an area pain, like a generalized area tightness. And it was equally as painful, if not more painful, than any back pain I'd previously had. Now, the difference in how that pain felt was, as I said, it was more generalized, whereas the pain I had experienced when I was a young adult was very focused on the specific spot on my spine. And when I worked out, it went away. This new kind of pain that I experienced after my stressful grad school was broad. It was not focused in one tiny spot. And it didn't go away at all if I did the same exercises that I had done to strengthen my lower back before, which always helped my back before. Thank goodness my husband had already gone through this situation and figured this out. Otherwise, I would have had no idea what was going on. I would have been so confused. Luckily, I just grabbed the book and read the techniques that he had done for his own back, and within a few weeks to a month, the pain faded away for me as well. But if I hadn't known that, I would have been so scared there was something new wrong with my back. There was nothing wrong. It was me getting over this stressful period. And Dr. Sarno actually mentions this specific case in his book where people go through a stressful time period and they only experience the back pain after that experience has ended. It's almost like the body is is staying strong to get through that tough time period. And then afterwards, it's like working through the stressful feelings that you repressed during that difficult time period. And this same experience recurred to me again after another challenging time period. This is when I gave birth to my youngest child and we moved apartments and I switched jobs all within just a few weeks. Following that time period, my back got so bad for about, a month or so. It was so bad I could barely lift my newborn baby out of the crib because it hurt to bend over. It felt so stiff. It hurt to sit in the chair and nurse. And again, it was that same pain that I recognized from earlier. It's like because I got to experience both pains, it's so clear to me the difference between them, a physical pain versus a mentally triggered back pain. They're both real. I'm quite sure I've experienced both. And the main difference is, again, specific spot again and again and again is probably a physically caused pain, especially if it responds to physical interventions like strengthening and stretching. Whereas an emotionally triggered back pain seems to be a more broad ache. It could occur in multiple different areas. It's not limited to one specific area. And it doesn't respond to any physical intervention or treatment. But if you wait for a few weeks, if you work through the causes or the recent emotional stressors that you might have, it will just fade away on its own. It's hard to believe that both could be true, but I really think they are. Now, my concern in sharing my experience here is I don't want people to assume that just because they've received a diagnosis of a physical problem, I don't want them to assume they definitely only have a physical problem. Because a lot of people might get a physical diagnosis, but the reality is it's a mentally triggered issue. Like my husband, the doctor said on the MRI, you probably have a herniated disc, but he didn't. It was just a mental, emotional triggered back pain. I bring this up just to mention that both could be true, but please do not rule out the chance that it could feel very, very physical. It could feel like a physically triggered issue, but if it's not responding to any physical interventions, or if it keeps recurring, even though you continue to do physical therapy, other things like that, at least consider addressing underlying repressed emotions, because that could actually be the trigger, even though it feels so physical. The emotionally, mentally caused physical pain feels so real. It feels so physically triggered. It's hard to imagine it could be mentally triggered. That was my experience, even having had physically triggered pain. Even I still get a small amount of back pain when I'm sick, or sometimes when I'm really stressed or go through a very stressful situation, but it's very minor in my experience. It might last for a day or two, and it's not very bad. And 95% of the time, my back is completely pain-free, unless I fail to exercise regularly, which does happen pretty often. And then my physical back pain actually comes back, which is always on the right side. And I do my exercises for a few days, and the physical pain just completely fades away. So that's my experience. Take it for what you will. I really hope that sharing these experiences of my husband's back pain and then my two different kinds of back pain, I hope in some way that they will be helpful to someone in considering the options for solutions for chronic back pain. And as always, if you have a story of healing from a chronic health condition using natural solutions, please share it with me. Reach out, share your story. I would love to have you on the podcast. Thank you for listening. Take care, and I look forward to sharing the next story soon.